Late at night, a lone technician at Israel's Northern Radar Command Post leaned forward in his chair. Something was wrong. The screen in front of him showed what it always showed: the quiet geometry of monitored airspace, the slow drift of commercial traffic, the predictable patterns of a night that should have been unremarkable. Then, the patterns changed. Fast, very fast. "Contact," he said quietly. Then louder: "Multiple contacts, ballistic, inbound from the east." The room exploded into motion. Officers lunged for secure phones. Commanders pulled on headsets mid-stride. Keyboards rattled. Screens refreshed. Within 11 seconds of the first detection, the alert had traveled up the chain of command to the highest levels of Israeli defense leadership. Within 20, it had triggered something that the people of northern Israel had prayed they would never hear again. The sirens came alive. Not one siren, every siren, from Haifa to Nahariya, from the Carmel Ridge down to the bay's industrial waterfront. The wail of air raid alerts crashed through bedroom windows and cafe speakers and the earpieces of late-shift workers in the port. It was a sound that lived in the cellular memory of every Israeli, a sound that meant one thing and one thing only: get underground now. Lights snapped on in apartment blocks across Haifa. Doors burst open. A woman on the third floor of a building near the harbor grabbed her infant with one arm and her go-bag with the other and was down the stairs before the second wail had finished. An elderly man on the street corner stood frozen for exactly 3 seconds before a younger neighbor grabbed his arm and hauled him toward the nearest shelter entrance. A restaurant in the Port District, still serving its last tables of the night, watched its staff and customers pour out together in a single panicked stream, running low, running fast, running for the reinforced rooms beneath the building's foundation. Above them all, in the cold and starless dark of the upper atmosphere, the missiles were already more than halfway there. Iran had not fired a warning shot. It had fired a statement. The weapons streaking westward at that moment were Kheibar Shekan ballistic missiles, among the most sophisticated ballistic weapons in the Iranian arsenal, designed specifically to defeat layered defense systems. Their name means fortress breaker. They had been launched from mobile platforms dispersed across multiple locations inside Iranian territory, a deliberate dispersal strategy intended to complicate preemptive targeting and maximize the number of missiles that survived long enough to begin their terminal descent. The salvo was large, the timing was coordinated, and the target was not a military installation. The target was Bazan, Israel's largest oil refinery, the enormous industrial complex sitting on the southern shore of Haifa Bay, processing millions of barrels annually, supplying a critical percentage of the nation's fuel. A facility that, if crippled, would send shockwaves through the Israeli economy within days. A facility surrounded by residential communities, by the port, by the dense northern city that Israel's enemies had always understood as the country's industrial heart. Whoever had selected the target knew exactly what they were hitting. The first layer of Israel's defense, Arrow 3, designed to intercept ballistic missiles at the edge of space itself, fired within seconds of the threat being confirmed. Interceptors launched on columns of white fire from positions across the northern highlands, accelerating through the atmosphere with a violence that turned night briefly into noon for anyone looking at the right patch of sky. The kill vehicles found their marks. 2 Kheibar Shekan missiles were destroyed cleanly in the exo-atmosphere, their warheads obliterated before they could begin their terminal plunge. A third detonated in a flash that observers on the Carmel Ridge described later as a sudden cold star, there and gone in an instant. Then David Sling engaged, Israel's mid-layer interceptors, faster, more maneuverable, designed for exactly the kind of incoming trajectory the remaining missiles were tracing, launched from positions on the ridge above the city. One more incoming warhead was struck over the open water of the bay, its debris falling harmlessly into the dark water below. The explosion it made when it died was visible from the Haifa waterfront, a brief, bright pulse above the sea, followed by nothing. The operators in the Intercept command center watched their screens with the particular intensity of people who know that the math of interception is never guaranteed. Radar tracks, velocity vectors, intercept solutions calculated and revised in milliseconds. Every missile that died in the sky was a building that still stood, a street that still existed, a family still breathing in their shelter. But one track on the screen refused to die. It was coming in steep and fast, steeper than the others, as if the trajectory had been calculated with knowledge of where the gaps in the defensive envelope might open. The intercept solution kept shifting. The system kept recalculating. The operators watched the track descend through the atmosphere with a velocity that left no room for a second attempt. The missile hit the Bazan Refinery complex at 2:43 in the morning. What happened next was not an explosion in the way that word usually gets used. It was a sequence, a brutal, rapid cascade of physics that turned a single warhead impact into something that felt to everyone within 2 kilometers like the Earth itself had decided to disagree with their continued existence. The initial detonation struck a processing unit on the eastern edge of the complex. The pressure wave from that detonation reached a secondary storage area before its own systems could respond. The secondary explosion was larger than the first, the tertiary larger still. Windows shattered across 4 neighborhoods simultaneously. Car alarms shrieked awake across the entire harbor district. In shelters beneath apartment blocks, families felt the floor shake beneath them and grabbed each other in the dark, saying nothing because there was nothing adequate to say. Then the fire came. It rose from the refinery in a column that turned the northern sky orange for 30 kilometers in every direction. Not the clean orange of a bonfire, the deep industrial red-black of burning petroleum distillates, of pipeline contents and processing chemicals, and decades of accumulated infrastructure suddenly, catastrophically liberated into combustion. The smoke that followed was black in a way that black does not normally look. It ate the stars above Haifa Bay. It drifted south on the night wind and left its smell on everything it touched. Inside the refinery grounds, emergency systems screamed into life. Automated shutoffs slammed closed across the pipeline network. Foam suppression systems deployed. Pressure valves vented. But the fire had grown faster than the systems designed to contain it, and within minutes it was clear that Bazan's internal response infrastructure, as sophisticated as any in the industrial world, was not going to be enough. Workers who had made it to internal muster points were now being evacuated through corridors filling with acrid smoke, guided by colleagues in emergency breathing equipment, stumbling across pavement that crunched with shrapnel and shattered safety glass. Those who had been outside when the missile hit, a night shift skeleton crew running routine maintenance checks, faced choices that no workplace safety protocol had ever been designed to address. Haifa's fire command mobilized everything, every unit, every specialized team, every piece of equipment in the metropolitan area was en route to the bay within minutes. Hazmat teams, chemical fire brigades, industrial response units from as far as Tel Aviv were paged and moving before the column of smoke had even reached its full height. Military cordons sealed off the refinery perimeter and pushed the growing crowd of stunned residents back from roads they needed clear. Coast Guard vessels moved across the bay, their crews scanning the water's surface for signs of burning fuel runoff. Police helicopters hung above the fire, their cameras feeding real-time imagery to emergency command centers. Civil defense operators coordinating the evacuation of the 3 residential neighborhoods closest to the complex reported that the siren warnings had worked. Most people were already underground before the impact. The death toll, when it was finally counted, would be far lower than the geometry of the strike had any right to produce. But the infrastructure toll was already visible from space. In Tel Aviv, the Prime Minister's car arrived at the Defense Ministry compound at 2:51 in the morning, 8 minutes after impact. The Situation Room was already full. The IDF Chief of Staff, the heads of Shin Bet and Mossad, the Air Force Commander, the National Security Cabinet. They watched the live feed from the Haifa cameras in a silence that lasted perhaps 4 seconds before the questions and reports and briefings began pouring into the room simultaneously. Nobody in that room used the word retaliation aloud. They didn't need to. It hung in the air above the conference table, like the smoke hanging above Haifa Bay, present, dense, impossible to ignore. In Tehran, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps released its statement before dawn had broken over the city. The language was precise and deliberate. This strike, the statement said, was a measured response to Israeli attacks on Iranian fuel infrastructure in recent weeks, strikes that Tehran framed as economic warfare, designed to freeze Iranian civilians through the coming winter by destroying the systems that kept fuel moving from refineries to homes. The Bazan strike, the IRGC declared, proved that Iran's long-range precision capabilities had crossed a threshold that Israel needed to understand. No facility, no city, no critical system within Israel's borders was beyond reach. The message was designed to terrify, and it worked. Oil markets didn't wait for morning. Brent crude futures spiked in overnight Asian trading at a velocity that triggered automated circuit breakers in 2 exchanges. Analysts weren't just pricing in the Bazan damage, they were pricing in the implication. If oil refineries were now legitimate military targets on both sides, then every facility, every pipeline, every tanker terminal in the broader region existed under a threat that no amount of security planning could fully neutralize. Gulf state energy ministers held emergency calls. Shipping insurers began recalculating war risk premiums for Eastern Mediterranean routes before sunrise. 2 major carriers rerouted vessels without waiting for official guidance. The UN Security Council chamber filled with ambassadors who had been pulled from their beds. The emergency session dissolved almost immediately into paralysis, Russia and China blocking any resolution language that didn't treat both sides symmetrically, the United States blocking any language that it did. The diplomats argued. The fire in Haifa kept burning. By the time gray dawn light began touching the top of the smoke column rising from Bazan, still visible, still fed by deep combustion in the refinery's core structures, Israel had said nothing publicly about what came next. The Prime Minister's brief statement acknowledged the attack, confirmed the civilian evacuation had largely succeeded, and promised that Israel would respond at a time and manner of its choosing. Every military analyst watching the Eastern Mediterranean understood what that language meant. Naval movements in the region had already shifted. Reserve activation orders had gone out quietly through channels that didn't appear in any press briefing. The silence from Jerusalem was not the silence of a country absorbing a blow and accepting it. It was the silence of a country deciding exactly where to strike back. What had happened at Haifa Bay in the space of 4.5 minutes, from the first radar contact to the moment the warhead hit, had taken a conflict that the world had spent 2 years trying to manage and contain, and dragged it into territory where the rules were no longer clear, the red lines were no longer visible, and the systems that kept oil flowing and lights on and cities functioning had become weapons in their own right. The question that hung over every embassy, every trading floor, every military command center from Washington to Beijing was the same question that the exhausted families still sitting in their Haifa shelters were asking each other in the dark. What happens now? Nobody had an answer. The fire in the bay kept burning, and the night kept waiting. And somewhere to the east, mobile missile launchers were already moving to new positions.